Welcome to the Red House RoundTable with your co-hosts Camille Lamb-Munro and Samantha Rampersad. Our topic for today is the Sustainability Challenge, Youth Voices Shaping Climate Solutions. We have our esteemed guests here today, Ms. Derval Barzey and Ms. Crystal Roberts. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Camille. It's my pleasure to be co-hosting here today with you. And we're talking about sustainability and climate change, and these terms can often be very difficult for persons like myself to understand. So I feel like kicking off this conversation, we should really discuss what does climate resilience mean. So Derval, would you help me out with that? What does climate resilience mean to you?
Samantha, climate resilience refers to the capacity of our communities, our systems, to adapt to and also respond to and recover from the impacts of climate change. We live in the era of climate change where we see the impacts of extreme weather events, extreme heat, and other changes to our environment. So how do we as people, as a community, as a society, build our tools and our systems to be able to continue with our way of life and even improve our standard of living? So this involves the various tools in terms of education, as well as infrastructure, and also resources to those that are most vulnerable.
Yeah, and climate change is definitely something that we're feeling here within Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, when was the last time you walk out in the sun without breaking some kind of sweat? I mean, you're looking pretty and you put on your nice cologne and you go outside and then, oh gosh, the sun is just facing you. So, Crystal, what are some things that you think young people can do to get involved with climate change and, to be resilient?
Thank you for that question, Samantha. Definitely get involved in research. I think the world is at our fingertips and we need to do more to do good. And when I say good, we need more Gretas. We need to advocate, we need to raise awareness on the impacts of climate change, and not just the impacts, but also how vulnerable the impacts of climate change could be to persons, women, the elderly, the young. And I think that is important research. Get involved in agriculture. How do we create or experiment on more resilient seeds, plants, and use social media to share the word.
Yeah. And so I know very often when we think about young people and climate change, the quickest thing we can plan is a beach cleanup. But that is not the only thing that we can do, So do you have any examples, any advice for the young people listening to us in terms of how they can be more involved, in combating climate change?
Definitely. So, for me, a very important first step in building climate resilience and engaging in climate action is public education. And I see young people as influencers. They're able to influence their peers, and they are able to use digital media to really get the message out there. Beyond that, as Crystal mentioned, research, but there are also I've been seeing a lot of social entrepreneurs and innovators coming up with climate solutions, helping us to build the circular economy so that we're able to manage impacts on the environment. So there are numerous ways for youth to get involved. Regardless of your interest or your background, there is something for you to do in climate action.
Most definitely.
Just building off of that point of research and becoming informed, I'd like to talk about disaster preparedness and its connection to climate change adaptation.
So in disaster, with the impacts of climate change, we have more frequent and more intense weather conditions, and preparedness is important. And I want to touch on the role of females, women, and girls in disaster preparedness. And I don't think we have a gender-responsive disaster preparedness system. And we have to respect and also tap into the knowledge of women and girls in preparedness at the school level, preparedness at the community level, preparedness at home. In post-disaster recovery, women and girls are the one who assist the family in recovering emotionally, psychologically, and I think that is the connection we have to make when it comes to having a more gender-responsive disaster preparedness system.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Especially having disaster preparedness can save a lot of lives, and having that education. What are some ways that us common folk can become informed about disaster preparedness and spread the word, whether it be through social media campaigns or whether it be through initiatives that we come up with ourselves?
And we could start it at the community level. I always like the bottom-up approach, and we need to tap into our traditional skills. And going back to the issue of being more climate resilient, I remembered, a long time, persons would have houses on stilts. And you see how important it is now when it comes to the effects of flooding. And those are some of the things, and sometimes the price of progress is high. Sometimes we have to go back to the traditional ways of how we do things.
I would agree. Climate change adaptation is very important, and there must also be certain standards and regulations that play a role in keeping everyone safe and encouraging disaster risk mitigation and reduction and so on.
Yeah, so one of the things we must recognize as well is that we live in a small island developing state. And in recent times, we would have very, very recently too, we noted that the U.S. president has opted to pull out of the Paris Treaty Agreement. And so now the question that we should also be asking ourselves is what effects does that have on us as small island developing states?
Honestly, that latest development is disappointing. We know that as small island developing states in the Caribbean, we are amongst those that are most vulnerable to impacts, although we have contributed the least in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And we continue to lobby those that are responsible, the global north or developed nations, as we refer to them, to really shoulder the burden, because they have incurred the impact, to support us in our development, to support us in building resilience. And to see that the United States has taken this decision or taken this position, it is disappointing, yet we still have to push ahead. And as small island developing states, we have to continue to look at how we can harness our indigenous and local knowledge and solutions, how we can build capacity in our people. And that's a very important place for youth to get involved not only in public awareness, but also in advocacy and also in implementing solutions. I see a lot of youths leading grassroots movements across the region. So in spite of this setback, as I would refer to it, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we can't lose sight of what is at stake. What is at stake is our lives and our livelihoods, our future. We know that climate change, it's intersectional because it cuts across so many other issues, gender, youth, differently abled persons, class, socioeconomic standing, but it's also intergenerational. And what we do today will impact those that are coming tomorrow.
You touched on quite a few points in your contribution there. You spoke about young people, their involvement. You talk about, the gender, using a gender lens when we look at this too. I know I would have had the pleasure recently to attend COP29, where we discussed all things climate change. And as a young person in COP, I felt like nothing but a mere speck, like a little tiny dot. You know how Trinidad does look on the big map when we're looking at it? That's how I felt. And it was kind of, you had to figure your way out. And, time and time again, we ask for policymakers to, include the youth voices, let us have an opportunity to be heard, which is why I'm so thankful that we're having this podcast here, youth-focused, youth-centered, and we have our young audience listening in with us too as well. What words of encouragement would you offer to young people like myself who attend these events and they feel very lost or they feel like they're not being heard? What words of advice would you give to them, and what strategies would you also offer? Because I know you have your podcast series as well that you touch on quite a few of these topics. So share your knowledge with us.
Yes, Samantha. So firstly, I want to encourage all youth to know that they matter. Their voice matters. The efforts that they take matters, the choices that they make. And I can relate to feeling, maybe lost in a space that is so huge and overwhelming. However, it's important to be in the room, and it's important to share your perspective. Even if you think persons are not taking you seriously, it's important to make your contributions and to firstly arm yourself with information. You want to enter into these spaces armed with knowledge, armed with your own experience, and then you want to come away with a wider perspective of what is happening. You may know what is happening in your community. You want to understand what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago, in the region, as well as globally, and that way you're better able to identify solutions. I always advocate on my podcast and in various advocacy initiatives for inclusive policy making, right? We want to ensure that we have youth involvement, right? Youth bring innovative ideas. So youth should never feel that they are, they are insignificant or their contributions are not important. They really are. They add to the perspective, they add solutions, and they shine light on ideas that other generations may not think about.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And Crystal has a very catchy name of her project. I want to bring her in on the conversation here. The Crystal Clear Project. Tell us what that is. Talk to us.
Right. Well, my organization is the Crystal Clear Initiative of Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm partnering with Derval from the Climate Conscious podcast on a campaign called. Yes, we're all for collaboration, yes. And we're all for support and taking each one of us along that journey. And so the Access Granted campaign is climate. It's focused on gender responsive climate finance. We have a 3-part project. It's the first feature is a social media campaign, which is currently taking place. The second feature is an art competition open for persons 16 years and above. And then we're closing it off with a capacity building workshop on gender responsive climate finance.
How can young people, stay connected to find out more about this? Because she's adding the gender lens that you just spoke about, and it's most definitely needed when we have conversations like this. So how can we get involved?
Yeah, most definitely follow the Crystal Clear Initiative on as well as Derval's Climate Conscious podcast on social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. There is a sign-up form. There is a mailing list. We know the young persons are very tech-savvy and quick with the fingers. Yeah. So that should not take nothing more than about 2 to 3 minutes, and get involved, come with us, and be on that journey for advocacy and awareness.
Yeah. Well, Crystal, I'm glad that you talked about the connectedness of youth, and yes. It's very important, especially through your various initiatives, that youth stay engaged and they feel empowered. They feel like their voices are being heard, and that leads to more social and emotional well-being. But I'd also like to touch on some barriers to youth engagement that you have faced and you have seen. I want to talk about that.
Yes, and that is important. And some of the barriers, one of the major barriers is being from a small island state. That it is a vulnerability in itself, and it's also a barrier. What, in my experience and in my years of traveling and being in certain rooms, is to take that vulnerability as your trump card. Create your vulnerability, create it into your resilience. And when you step into a room, make sure you know what you're going to say. Because even if you don't think that they notice you, they do. And if you have 5 minutes to pitch an idea, to make a statement, let it work for you. Know what you're going to say before you go into that room. You don't have to get prepared if you stay prepared.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. What about you, Derval?
So I would say that creating the Climate Conscious podcast was my response to that barrier of feeling like you don't have access or influence in the climate change space, and recognizing that a lot of persons, they are not aware of how climate change is affecting them, as well as how they impact our environment. So I decided to use the tools that were available to me by launching this podcast and just having conversations with various subject matter experts. So I always say that, no one is coming to save us, and we have to save ourselves. And sometimes no one may come to offer you an opportunity, but you can create your own opportunity. I use the medium of podcasting, but there are other avenues for youth to get involved. When we talk about climate action, there's both the mitigation side as well as the adaptation side, right? So we know that renewable energy is developing. That's a space for persons who are into, engineering or physics to get involved, to see how they can use their background to contribute to resilience. There are those who are into tree planting. You mentioned beach cleanups. But there's so much more in terms of, helping our ecosystems to help us to be resilient, replanting mangroves, So I like to use that as an example of just looking around you. When you arm yourself with information, as I said, you understand your environment and you understand, what is at risk. And you just think about what contribution I can make. Because yes, climate change is complex and very overwhelming. But, we have to attack it with positivity, intentionality, and definitely be informed about what we're doing, right? So that's the importance of building capacity. And I'm so happy that we're having this conversation. Yes. Because everybody needs to be a climate change advocate.
Yeah, it definitely is impacting our livelihoods today, tomorrow, and we don't even know if we'll have a future in the next, let's say 40 years if we wait so long. I mean, it's already snowing in Florida. My mom used to always say she's waiting to see Trinidad snow, and I never thought it would be possible until now. But I do want to remind our viewers that you are tuning in to the Red House RoundTable Sustainable Development Podcast Series, and we're discussing the Sustainability Challenge Youth Voices Shaping Climate Solutions with your hosts Samantha and Camille, and we have our two guests here with us, Crystal and Derval. And so we're discussing climate change. Now let's talk about what we see for the future. What vision do you have for Sweet TNT or the rural as a whole when we link it to climate change and sustainability? Let's start with Crystal.
I see good things. I am hopeful. I see young people in the forefront of climate action, and it can't get better than that. I mean, there is always room for improvement, but I see us taking our vulnerability and becoming resilient. And we are at the front and center of that, and we just need to continue that work. Yeah. And it also takes the political will, and we always sign a social contract with our governments, and we have to hold them accountable. All of us are stakeholders in this, and all stakeholders should be held accountable, from the youth to women, to the elderly, to governments, to the private sector. Everyone needs to be held accountable when it comes to adapting and mitigating climate change impacts.
I am also hopeful that, as communities, as a nation, and globally, we would really prioritize sustainability. that whatever decisions we make about our development, or even as businesses, as policymakers, we would look at it through the lens of how does this boost our resilience, how does this enhance inclusivity, equity, thinking about the long-term impacts of whatever changes that we make. And, we spoke about America pulling out of the Paris Agreement, but even at the local level, I hope to see more of our people, our youth, and others getting involved, and as Crystal said, holding our policymakers accountable so that whatever we are investing our taxpayers' dollars in, it has to be climate resilient, because it doesn't make sense if we invest in infrastructure today and then in 5 years, because of sea level rise, that infrastructure is no longer accessible to us, right? So I want to see us change the way we look at development at all levels, from household, businesses becoming resilient, adapting ESG. We're seeing that trend slowly coming on stream in Trinidad and Tobago. So I hope to see more of that, with each of us taking on a personal responsibility as well as a collective responsibility for shaping Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension the region, to becoming sustainable and climate resilient.
I want to bring in my co-host here. What is your hope for Sweet TNT?
My hope is that we are all well informed, that we stay connected, and I also really want to say that regional integration is important so that we are all on the same page. Communication, there's no such thing as too much communication. Yeah, so I like how you two would have touched on staying connected. You would have touched on some tools that youth can use. If someone like myself were to have an interest in starting a social media campaign, what are some steps that I can take to ensure that I am putting out accurate information, that I'm connecting with the right people? What does that look like from your perspective?
Well, for me, research is always important, because you want to be sure of what you put out there in the public domain via social media, because nothing really leaves the internet. But it does not take a lot of effort to start. And if anyone knows how I started, I had one photo on my social media page. One. Had nothing much to say, because I kept doubting myself, people want to hear what I have to say, people want to see these posts. Don't, when you're in that space, and it's always good to have a community and a circle of friends, family around you to push you. All you need is one post to start. That's all you need to start your advocacy and awareness. So I would say, if you don't have it now, when this podcast is finished, you need to start.
Definitely.
You have any words of inspiration you want to share with them in terms of, getting off and going with social media? Because I know you have your podcast. I am also looking for some tips for myself,
Yes, I would encourage persons to connect with like-minded persons. As you can see, Crystal and I connected over climate change and gender justice. And through that, we were able to partner and collaborate to produce something that has a greater impact than we would have had individually. So I would encourage persons to really seek out communities and partnerships with others to make a difference, find persons who have similar interests. And that's also important in terms of accessing opportunities, because there is funding available for climate initiatives. So when you join forces, you bring together your skills, your strengths, you're able to address your challenges collectively and do something that is tangible for your community.
Yeah. I like that you touched on funding opportunities, because that is a major issue we as young people have, but there are quite a few opportunities when it comes to climate change. And just before we head into wrapping up, we're not just pounding the climate change movement with young people and saying beach cleanups is not sufficient, because I had one just like a few Sundays ago. But, we have to start looking a little bit more deeper, rather than just the mere surface of educating yourself is the starting point. But we also need to take the lead and start actually doing the action. Policy development is a major issue and challenge we may have, but it's not the only route, as you said. And plugging it in here, that is actually going to be our next topic up for discussion on this series. We're going to be discussing policy developments, but I also want to talk and mention a little bit what I'm doing as a young person. So I have this project called Youth for Climate Guard that I'm in partnership with PAHO and CARICOM, and we're looking at the effects that climate change has on Trinidad and Tobago. We know we used to have seaweed a certain time around the year. It is here, unfortunately, all the time, irritating people on the beach because I love the water, but this thing's scratchy. So I was thinking, what could I do? What could I do to remove the seaweed? And the idea actually came while I was sitting on the beach with my friend in Barbados. And we said, but this is the issue we have in Trinidad as well. So now we're using sargassum seaweed, dead ones, and we're recycling it to try to find an alternative to traditional cement. We're promoting recycling, upcycling, and also we're reducing mining. So you have to look at your capabilities and, like you said, partnership. We have a whole female movement happening inside of here, and we're not forgetting the men that are our greatest allies, because you also mentioned using a gender lens and including everyone in what we do. So, I would really like to see young people doing more, getting more involved, because we do understand that we have a lot of issues and challenges in Trinidad and Tobago. But if we don't take care of planet Earth, well, those other issues really won't be so relevant if none of us is here. So now I would invite you to give us your closing statement, your call to actions, and don't forget to plug in your social media handles for us. Go ahead.
Well, firstly, as I advocate for educating yourself, public awareness, I will invite everyone to tune in to the Climate Conscious podcast, which is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. And beyond that, as Crystal mentioned, just starting. Often when we think about a climate solution, we think it has to be something major, something complex. But climate solutions can be simple. It can be as simple as being efficient in how you use your energy, the choices that you make in terms of the purchases that you make in terms of maybe buying local, or starting a home garden, or composting, or reducing your consumption. So again, I want to reiterate that there is a role for everyone to play in climate action and in making Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean region resilient. So find your place, find your role, find the action that you want to take and commit to it. And finally, get connected.
So how do we get connected to you? What's your social media handle?
Yes. So you can follow The Climate Conscious on Instagram and LinkedIn. And you can also visit theclimateconscious.com.
Right. Crystal?
Yes, I would say collaborate for impact. Yes, we could do things on our own, but why not collaborate to make it bigger and better? I think that we have this notion that we're independent. No one is independent. Everyone is interdependent. Everybody needs somebody. So why not collaborate for impact? Get like-minded people like yourselves and do something. Just start. I think, and that is what Derval and I are doing currently. We're collaborating for a greater impact, and as I close, I just want to say, you could follow me, the Crystal Clear Initiative at Crystal Clear TT on Instagram and Facebook, and you could also find the Crystal Clear Initiative on LinkedIn.
Camille, how do we stay connected with you?
You can stay connected with me through my LinkedIn. That is my preferred source of communication. You can reach out to me, network with me, and we can have a conversation such as this.
Yeah, and I'm going to put in my plug too. Follow me at Samantha Rampersad on all my social media accounts to stay updated in terms of what we're doing. Also, I post a lot of youth opportunities and funding opportunities, not limited to climate change, and also, get involved with Youth for Climate Guard. I welcome everyone. So thank you all so much. It has been a lovely discussion, and you all can keep connected with us at www.ttparliament.org and follow us on Instagram and YouTube at ttparliament1, and a special plug for the youth parliamentarians, TT Youth Parliament. I hope I had that correct, but we will also link them below. Thank you all so much, ladies. It has been lovely.
Thank you.
Both of you for having us.